So we've finished the fall of Rome, and we've talked about all the reasons that Rome fell, and we've looked briefly at some of the impacts that Rome has had in the modern world. So we've seen the art and architecture and the government that exists, specifically in America, because of some of the things that the Romans established. So even though Rome declined, they left an impact in the world, in all the places that they had taken over and beyond. So we're going to move in now to the European Middle Ages because technically historians consider the fall of Rome in 476 to be the beginning of the Middle Ages. So if you see on this slide, it says 500 to 1500 CE is considered the Middle Ages, but we technically date that to begin with the fall of the Roman Empire. So here we have a map, and this map shows the growth of the Roman Empire as it continues expanding through the various periods of expansion at its height, and then slowly it begins to decline. And you see the split when the capital was moved, and suddenly the blue, which is considered the Western Empire, shrinks down until it's nothing. And we talked in class about how the eastern side then expanded to eventually become the Byzantine Empire. And so you're going to see the Eastern Empire shrink and then turn green and grow into the Byzantine Empire. And with this map, you can think back about what theories you believe were the most significant to the decline of the Roman Empire. And you'll notice the Byzantine Empire continues for quite a long period of time. All right, so as we move forward into the Middle Ages, we're looking here at a map of Europe in about 600 CE. So by 600, the western part of the empire had lost all of its land, and most of it was because of barbarian invasions. So you see here all of the places in Europe and who controlled the different regions. So remember I told you that though the Roman Empire was in this area, there were other people that lived in these other regions. So you see, these are considered the Germanic tribes. There were some Germanic tribes up in this area, and these are the ones that started conquering the Roman Empire from the north. But what we're going to pay a lot of attention to is this green area, and you see that it says Charles the Great. So we're going to learn a little bit about Charles the Great. Charles the Great's known as Charlemagne. He is considered to be the father of Europe. In 800 CE, so this is about 300 years after the decline of the Roman Empire, Charlemagne was crowned Holy Roman Emperor by Pope Leo III. Charlemagne becomes so powerful because he works with the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church at this time was growing and expanding to have more power, and it would continue to grow and expand throughout the Middle Ages. The church really becomes the central part of people's lives. So Charlemagne has two goals. His two goals are to unite Western Europe, which he is successful in accomplishing much of that goal, and to convert everyone to Christianity. So again, looking back here, you see that at the time he did unite much of Western and Central Europe. Charlemagne was more powerful than any other ruler had been since the Roman Empire, and because he was so strongly allied to the church, this gives that empire a sense of unity that really hadn't been experienced since the fall of the Roman Empire. There was no other empire that had amassed this much territory in the 300 years prior to Charlemagne. You also see here this idea of a Carolingian Renaissance, and a Renaissance is a rebirth, and what he does here is there's art that gets added to the Catholic Church. So hopefully by this point in your study of history, you realize what happens after strong leaders die. And this, with the death of Charlemagne, continues the trend where no leader after Charlemagne is able to control that amount of land. And it ends up splitting his empire, dividing it and weakening it, and leaving it vulnerable to attacks. So you are going to now get a sense of the Vikings and the role that they played in the Middle Ages. So when the empire after Charlemagne was weakened, they were more susceptible to outside attacks by different areas outside of that region. So up in the northern region, up in Scandinavia, I'm going to go back to the map of Scandinavia so you can see it. So if this is the Roman Empire, or the Charlemagne's empire here, what weakens all of a sudden, the Vikings come up from Scandinavia up here, and also from Iceland over in this region, which it's just not on the map because it's further out to the west. So that's where the Vikings come from. You also have some outside attackers from this region to the east, and then also down from the Byzantine Empire down in this region. So to go back, the one that we focused the most on, because the ones that had a pretty significant impact, were the Vikings. And the Vikings were from Scandinavia, and that was the region that I pointed out, just to the north of Europe. They're mainly fishermen, and they really are not capable of creating a strong empire. Their goal wasn't to take over land and control the land. Instead, they raid the land to try to take the goods and the resources, with the goal of essentially destroying everything in their path. They're culturally centered around war, not education. Education wasn't part of their culture. So you've probably seen the Viking ships before. The Viking ships were used for intimidation, and basically the goal was that if people in Central Europe knew that the Vikings were coming, not only were the ships intimidating, but everything that they wore and the way that the Vikings dressed was meant to be intimidating, so that if they were to come and attack, basically the cities would surrender, although most of the time the Vikings would go ahead and take everything they wanted, pillage it, and burn to the ground. They were known for being very gruesome. Now, the reason that we're even talking about the Vikings is because of what happens as a result of the Vikings. There's no central government that exists in Europe at this time. There's nobody as strong as Charlemagne that's really able to build an army and defend this land. So instead, walls start being built. People build walls out of protection. And this is going to introduce this idea of feudalism. And you learned a little bit about it in 6th grade when we were talking about China and some of the Chinese government systems. And if you remember, it was the fact that everybody played a role. So there were serfs that lived on the land, there were kings that controlled the land but gave small pieces of the land to lords. And this same concept that had developed in China hundreds of years earlier now makes its way to Europe, because the feudal manor develops out of a need for protection in the midst of a warlike culture. Basically, walls are built, and the people that live inside these manors, they built them to protect themselves from the outside attackers of the Vikings and other outside groups. This is the key point for you to understand about feudalism. It's that everybody has a job. And those jobs are really what make these feudal manors successful as a way of life during these Middle Ages. On these feudal manors, there's a castle, there's a church, and basically the monarch ruled over several manors, so several different walled regions, and gave control to the lords, but in actuality it was really the lords that were governing these regions. So here is what a manor might look like. Again, there would be walls around the outside edges, there were roads, there was a little village, a manor house, where the lord would live. Basically, it's like a little community, but it's small enough that the lord was able to control everybody on this particular manor. You notice here, too, the green was the common fields, meant that this is where the serfs could farm for everyone, but that there was always going to be a particular section designated just for the lord. So the lord was definitely the highest class on the manor, and he was the one that controlled all of the inner workings. This is the hierarchy of a manor. This is something that is key to understanding the feudal system. And within the manor, these people all played an important role. Notice not the monarch. The monarch generally didn't live on each individual manor. He would live on one manor, but he would be responsible for controlling multiple manors around a region. The most important person that actually was on the manor were the lords. And the lords provide land to other people. Specifically, they provide land to the serfs, because the serfs have nowhere else to live. So the serfs are on the land, and it also says that he provides the serfs with protection. But the way that he provides the serfs with protection is by hiring knights who are responsible for protecting the land. So the knights protect the lord and the serfs in turn produce food for the kingdom. So the serfs produce food for the lords, but also produce food for the knights. So you notice everybody has a role. The lord, in turn, is able to collect food as taxes and eventually will pay taxes back to the monarch. So the lord collects taxes from all the people that live on the land and gives some of those taxes to the monarch. So he promises, he takes an oath to maintain loyalty to the monarch. And in order for the lord to even get any of that land to control, the person who gives him that land is the monarch. So this relationship between the lord and the monarch is important because basically the lord just promises loyalty, and they really do, for a very long period of time, remain loyal to the king that they have pledged their loyalty to. Next time your class meets, we're going to be doing a simulation where you're actually going to get to be different people that live on the manor, and so that you understand more how each person played a role. That's what makes feudalism successful for a period of time. It's not that they have such a strong way of voting or that they have such a strong system of government. It's that they all need each other. And ultimately, it's this control of land and what they do with the land, whether they're fighting for the land or getting food off the land or controlling the land. It's the land that binds them all together, and this need for working together to protect themselves from outside attackers. So next we're going to look into how feudalism gets to England, because we're going to look specifically at England over the next few days after we do this simulation. There's a man named William the Conqueror, and he is a very powerful duke in France, in modern-day France. And his cousin was the king in England, and he dies. This is King Edward, who dies in 1066. But there's some confusion about who should take over the crown in England because he doesn't actually have an heir. King Edward doesn't have a son that should take over. So Harold, who's another cousin, gets appointed to be the King of England, and Duke William disagrees with that. He believes that he has the power to take over the crown in England. So he actually crosses the English Channel, invades England, kills Harold, and is a successful leader in England. He becomes the King of England. He's known as William the Conqueror. A lot of kings get names, and William's name is the Conqueror because of what he does. When William conquers England, he brings with him the feudal system. And because the feudal system has been working so effectively in Europe of establishing order and protecting the people from outside invasions, it's also successful in England. Until William actually does something to start to take away some power from the lords or the nobles. In 1086, he requests a survey of the land, and in this survey, he asks all of the lords to tell him how much land he has and how many people live on that land. And what that does is that takes away some power from the lords, because prior to this, the lords were the ones who were in control of taxing. But now, the king is going to start taking over that taxing. This is going to become significant to understand because it's going to start to break down the feudal system, but we'll look more at that in the days to come.